Welcome to my colleague Agnes Thompson's channel, and my name is Margot, and I will share my story with you.
My name is Margot, and I am 78 years old. For 52 of those years, I have lived in this house, a sturdy two-story sentinel against the persistent damp of the Oregon air. It's a climate that works its way into everything, staining the cedar siding a distinguished gray, seeping into the wood of the porch swings and, if you let it, into the very marrow of your bones. It's a constant, gentle reminder of the chill that life can send your way when you least expect it. I used to love the rain. I loved the percussive rhythm of it on the roof, a sound that told me the world was being washed clean, that the prize-winning roses my late husband Arthur and I so carefully tended would drink deep and flourish into a riot of crimson and ivory. Now, the rain feels different. Now, it feels like a precursor, a harbinger of a deeper, more personal cold. It all began with a change in frequency, a shift so subtle I almost dismissed it as wishful thinking, a lonely widow's fantasy. My son, Dr. Adrian Vance, a man whose career I had championed with the fierce, unwavering pride that only a mother can know, began to visit more often. In the profound, echoing quiet that had followed Arthur's passing 3 years prior, these visits were initially a balm to my solitary existence. The big house, a vessel of cherished memories and lingering echoes, felt less cavernous with him in it. His expensive, sharp cologne, a scent of cedarwood and clinical ambition, was a stark and almost abrasive contrast to the familiar perfume of my life, old books, beeswax furniture polish, and the dried lavender I kept in hand-painted bowls in every room. He would sit in Arthur's worn leather armchair, a throne he seemed to both revere and resent, his spine impeccably straight, his gaze sharp and disconcertingly assessing. He was a cardiologist, a man who mapped the intricate electrical pathways of the human heart for a living, and he was beginning to look at me with that same clinical detachment, as if searching for a flaw in my own wiring. "Mom, are you remembering to take your blood pressure medication?" he'd ask, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, the kind I'm sure soothed the anxieties of countless patients before they surrendered to anesthesia. "Of course, dear," I'd reply, gesturing to my meticulously organized pill container on the kitchen counter, each day's allotment nestled in its tiny, color-coded compartment. "You know my memory is sharp as a tack." "I know," he'd say, but he wouldn't look at the container. He would just watch me, his dark eyes holding a kind of diagnostic focus that made me feel less like his mother and more like a complex case study he was determined to solve. He was my son, a man of science, of data, of peer-reviewed journals and undeniable facts. I was his mother, a woman who had built a life on intuition, on the subtle wisdom gleaned from decades of watching the world turn, of tending a garden and learning the intricate, unspoken language of the seasons. We were from two different worlds, and I was beginning to feel, with a sinking heart, that he saw mine as hopelessly, dangerously obsolete. He started to bring up my finances during these visits, a topic Arthur had always handled with gruff competence, but which I had managed perfectly well since he'd been gone. He'd talk about the estate, the house, the investments, using words like optimization and risk aversion. "We need to make sure everything is streamlined, Mom. For your peace of mind," he'd say, the phrase peace of mind sounding less like a comfort and more like a carefully chosen anesthetic. "It's all perfectly organized, Adrian. Your father was nothing if not meticulous." "I have the files right here." "I know, Mom, but things change. The market changes. We need to be dynamic." He spoke in a corporate dialect that felt alien in my cozy, chintz-curtained kitchen, a language of spreadsheets and projections that had no place among the scent of my baking bread. In those moments, I would try to pull him back, to anchor him to our shared reality, the one built on love and memory, not on market fluctuations. Last week, I had tried to tell him about the day his father, and I planted the great copper beech in the backyard. We were so young, just married, laughing as we dug into the rocky soil, our hands blistered and our faces smudged with dirt. I told him how its roots were now as deep and tangled as our own family history, holding the very earth of our lives together. He had smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a patient, practiced, dismissive smile. "That's a nice story, Mom," he'd said, his attention already drifting back to the incessant buzzing of his phone. Then, with a jarring pivot, "Speaking of the house, we should really get a new appraisal done. For insurance purposes, of course." It was a cold, sharp rejection, a clear and painful signal that my memories, the very currency of my soul, held no value in his relentlessly modern world. They were anecdotes, not assets. I finally voiced my formless unease to my oldest and dearest friend, Rowena. She came over on a Thursday, bringing a gust of wind, a defiant spirit, and a bag of the dark, oily coffee beans she favored, the kind that could raise the dead. Rowena was a force of nature, a woman who had buried a husband, raised 3 hellion boys into respectable men, and faced life's storms without ever losing the defiant fire in her eyes. "He's worried, Margot," she said, her voice laced with a skepticism that mirrored my own as she poured the steaming black coffee into my favorite porcelain cups. "That's what you want to believe. But men like that, successful, driven men, they don't just worry. They plan. They strategize. They see a problem, and they solve it. You need to ask yourself what problem he thinks he's solving." "He's my son, Ro," I whispered, the words feeling thin and fragile even to my own ears. "He's a good man." "He's a man," she corrected gently but firmly. "And men, especially smart ones, can convince themselves that any action is noble if it benefits them. Just be careful. Watch him. Don't sign anything." I wanted to believe she was wrong, a cynical old crone seeing shadows where there were none. I had to believe it. This was Adrian, my boy, the child I had rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had patched, whose photograph in his graduation gown sat on my mantelpiece. But the coldness in his eyes, the way he looked past me when I spoke of things that mattered, the way he looked at the house, the land, the towering beech tree when he thought I wasn't watching, it planted a seed of doubt that was beginning to sprout, a dark, invasive weed in the well-tended garden of my maternal love. The final push, the gentle shove off the cliff, came on a dreary Tuesday, the sky the color of slate. He arrived with a handsome leather briefcase and an expression of carefully crafted professional concern, an expression I now realized he must practice in the mirror. He spread a sheaf of thick, creamy papers on my polished dining room table, their crisp edges a stark contrast to the familiar, worn wood. "Mom, I've been looking over your medical records. I had a long chat with Dr. Stevens. We're in agreement that it's best if I take a more active role in managing your healthcare decisions. It's called a healthcare proxy. It's a standard procedure, really. It's just to be safe in case of an emergency." He said it so calmly, so reasonably, his words a neat and tidy package of filial duty and medical prudence. But my heart, the one he was expertly trained to understand, began to beat a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird fluttering in a cage. I felt a profound sense of alienation, a chill that had nothing to do with the Oregon rain lashing against the windows. His words were the hook, a perfectly baited, professionally polished line designed to reel me in, to make me a passive participant in the administration of my own life. I looked at the expensive fountain pen in his hand, a gift I'd given him for his 40th birthday, then at his face, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, I saw a stranger wearing my son's skin, a cold-eyed interloper with my son's voice. But the moment passed, as such moments do, banished by a lifetime of love and conditioned trust. He was my son, my Adrian, my brilliant boy. And so, with a trembling hand that utterly betrayed the calm I tried to project, I took the pen and signed the document, feeling as though I was not just granting him a proxy, but handing over the master key to the house of my own life. Then the world, my world, the one I had so carefully curated and navigated for nearly 8 decades, began to tilt. The shift was insidious, a masterclass in psychological warfare, almost imperceptible at first, like the slow, silent turning of a kaleidoscope by an unseen, malevolent hand. Adrian's visits, once a source of comfort, became inspections. They were no longer social calls, they were clinical observations, data-gathering missions. He'd walk through my house, his polished Italian shoes silent on the oriental rugs, his fingers lightly touching my things, a porcelain figurine from my travels, a silver picture frame holding a photo of a young, smiling Arthur, the worn spine of a favorite book. His eyes not admiring, but cataloging, appraising. The dialogue between us, once a flowing river of shared anecdotes and easy banter, became a series of clipped, laconic exchanges, each one a subtle test. "Mom, why is the television remote on the floor?" he'd ask, his tone implying not a simple, accidental drop, but a symptom, a red flag, a failing mind. "I must have misplaced it, dear. I was dusting earlier." "Are you sure? You haven't been feeling confused lately, have you?" "A little foggy." The word confused became his favorite weapon, a subtle, corrosive poison he dripped into every conversation. He began to orchestrate small, maddening scenarios, tiny tears in the fabric of my reality. He'd move my reading glasses from the nightstand to a bookshelf in the living room, then watch with that same clinical gaze as I searched for them, a growing, familiar panic tightening in my chest. "They were right here," I'd insist, my voice rising slightly. "I always put them right here." "It's all right, Mom," he'd say, his voice a suffocating blanket of condescending calm as he would find them for me. "We all get a little forgetful sometimes. It's perfectly normal." But his tone implied it wasn't normal at all. He was a doctor, and he was using his intimate knowledge of the human mind, its frailties and its fears, to slowly, methodically, and maliciously unravel mine. A few weeks later, he told me he had updated my diagnosis in the national health system. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his multiplication tables, and delivered the verdict with the dispassionate air of a man reading a lab report. "It's a mild cognitive impairment, Mom. The official diagnosis is early-onset dementia. Now, it's nothing to be alarmed about, truly. We've caught it very early. But this means we need to be proactive. We need a plan." I felt a surge of cold, white-hot fury, a feeling so intense it almost made me dizzy, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I was Margot Vance. I read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy for pleasure. I completed the New York Times crossword puzzle every Sunday in ink. I could recall the intricate plot of a foreign film I'd seen 20 years ago. My gift, if you could call it that, was my mind, my razor-sharp ability to see patterns, to understand the subtle, unspoken currents of human nature. And he, my own flesh and blood, was trying to steal it from me, to declare it broken and defective. His contempt for my world, for my memories, was no longer passive. It was an active, strategic assault. The tendrils of his insidious influence spread through the family like a blight. His wife, my daughter-in-law Catherine, who once called to gossip about her book club, now called to check in, her voice saturated with a new, saccharine, pitying tone. My grandchildren, who used to visit for holidays and fill the house with the chaotic, beautiful noise of their lives, became distant. I tried calling my granddaughter, Lily, a bright, fiery girl who had inherited my love of history, to talk about her college applications. The conversation was stilted, painfully awkward. "Grandpa Adrian says we shouldn't bother you with stressful things right now, Grandma," she said, her young voice laced with an uncomfortable mixture of love and programmed caution. "He says you need to rest." He had briefed them. He had poisoned the well, turning my own family against me with his lies. Then came the moment of truth, the next step in his meticulously planned campaign, the introduction of my warden. He arrived one afternoon not alone, but with a young man he introduced as Caspian. Caspian was tall and slender, with kind, deeply observant eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He had a quiet, unobtrusive demeanor that was the polar opposite of Adrian's booming confidence. "Caspian is a registered nurse, Mom," Adrian announced, his voice echoing with false cheer in the high-ceilinged foyer. "He's going to be helping you out a few days a week. Just to make sure you're safe and taking your meds on time." The word safe now sounded exactly like imprisoned. Caspian, for his part, simply nodded, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, significant moment. He noticed the worn copy of The Master and Margarita on my nightstand. "That's a heavy read," he said quietly, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for an instant. He's my favorite. It was a tiny moment, a single exchanged sentence in the shadow of my son's oppressive presence, but it was the first time in months someone had seen me instead of a diagnosis. It was a flicker of light in a darkening room. My son, the doctor, brought more papers. They were thick, official-looking documents, bound in a neat blue folder. "Just some routine consent forms for your new managed care plan," he said, his voice as smooth as polished silk. He laid them on the table in front of me, tapping a finger on the signature lines. But I saw it. As he passed me the pen, the same expensive fountain pen, his fingers brushed mine, and I felt the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. I saw the way his eyes darted away from mine toward the window, a classic, textbook tell of a liar. He was nervous. It was a micro-expression, a fleeting crack in his confident, commanding facade, but I saw it. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones, that these were not routine forms. He was building a cage, just as Rowena had warned, and he was using my love and trust as the bars. I was being erased, my identity systematically replaced by a fraudulent diagnosis. I was Margot, but in the official records, in the eyes of the world he was so carefully constructing for me, I was becoming someone else entirely. A ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms where I had once lived so fully. The culmination of his insidious plan was not a dramatic confrontation, not a heated argument, but a quiet, bureaucratic act of violence that was all the more terrifying for its civility. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the sky a flat, indifferent gray. An ambulance, clean and white and terribly official, pulled into my driveway, its presence a violation of the morning calm. I wasn't sick, I hadn't fallen, I hadn't called for them. They were there because my son, my proxy, my flesh and blood, had decreed it. He stood on my porch, his face a perfect, sorrowful mask of duty, a son forced to make the hard choice for his ailing mother. I saw him through the leaded glass of my front door, a portrait of false nobility. Two paramedics, a man and a woman with practiced, gentle expressions and eyes that refused to meet mine, gently but firmly led me out of my own home. "It's for the best, Mom," Adrian said, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder, on the magnificent copper beech tree that stood sentinel in the yard. He couldn't look at me. "The new facility is wonderful. You'll have round-the-clock care. You won't have to worry about a thing anymore." My protests were useless, my words twisted in the air and relabeled as outbursts of confusion, my righteous anger dismissed as a symptom of my condition. They drove me to a place called Meadowlark Gardens. The name was a cruel, saccharine joke. There were no meadows, no larks, only the pervasive, sterile smell of bleach and despair and the faint, funereal scent of wilting flowers in the lobby. It was there, in a small, beige room that felt more like a cell, with a window that overlooked a vast, soulless parking lot, that I finally understood the full, breathtaking scope of his betrayal. My house, the beautiful home I had built with Arthur, the sanctuary of my life and the repository of my most precious memories, was sold within a week. Rowena told me over a crackling, smuggled phone call, her voice trembling with a rage that mirrored my own. "The sign went up yesterday, Margot. A big, ugly red sign. Sold. Just like that." I wanted to tear it down with my bare hands. He had used the power of attorney, the one I had so foolishly, so trustingly granted him, to liquidate my entire life. My furniture, my books, my photographs, my memories, all of it, gone, scattered to the winds by the son who was supposed to be my protector. He had complete and total control of my bank accounts, my investments, everything Arthur and I had worked our entire lives to build. He had changed my diagnosis to gain absolute control over my estate, and he had won. For a time, a long, gray, timeless stretch of days, I almost gave up. The fight went out of me, replaced by a profound, crushing emptiness. I sat in that sterile room, watching the endless Oregon rain streak down the windowpane, a prisoner of my son's greed and my own misplaced love. The feeling of powerlessness was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered my will, crushing the very air from my lungs. The family I had nurtured, the legacy I thought I was building, now saw me as a burden, a problem that had been conveniently and profitably solved. Then, something shifted. It began as a whisper of defiance in the sterile hallway. It was Caspian, the quiet nurse. I overheard him speaking to another staff member, a stern-faced woman named Brenda. "I don't know, Brenda," Caspian said, his voice low but clear and firm. "I've been monitoring her closely. Her vitals are perfect, her blood work is clean as a whistle. And she's lucid. Yesterday she quoted Shakespeare to me, a long passage from King Lear, no less. The whole thing feels off. It feels wrong." That small spark of doubt, that validation from a near stranger in this sea of condescending pity, reignited a pilot light deep within my soul. A few days later, Caspian acted. During his rounds, while he was taking my blood pressure, his movements calm and professional, he slipped a folded piece of paper into the palm of my hand. He did it so smoothly, so discreetly, I almost didn't notice. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw not pity, but conspiracy. Later, with my door closed and my heart pounding, I unfolded the paper. It was a printout from the hospital's digital charting system, a document I was never meant to see. "This is your original diagnosis from Dr. Stevens 6 months ago," he had written in a neat, small, almost architectural script above the first section. I read the words, my eyes drinking them in. Normal age-related memory decline. Patient is sharp and fully cognizant. Then my gaze dropped to the second entry, dated 2 months later, entered the day after I signed the proxy papers. And this, he had written, an arrow pointing to the damning text, is the override. Entered by Dr. Adrian Vance. Diagnosis: rapid onset dementia. Caspian had found the digital trail, the arrogant, damning footprint he never thought anyone would look for, let alone find. In that moment, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that wasn't mine, the grief turned to ice in my veins. The despair congealed into a cold, hard, diamond-like resolve. My son, the doctor, my Adrian, had used his power, his knowledge, and my boundless love to take everything from me. He thought he had buried me alive in this beige tomb. But he had forgotten one crucial thing about the seeds his father and I had planted in that rich Oregon soil all those years ago. They were resilient. They knew how to survive the harshest winters. They knew how to lie dormant, gathering strength, before breaking through the frozen earth. And I was about to show him, with devastating, surgical precision, what it meant to grow back. The question was no longer if I could survive this. The question was how I would systematically and completely dismantle the fraudulent world he had built upon his lies. The final culmination would not be a tearful reunion. It would be a reckoning. My new purpose gave me a clarity I hadn't felt in years, a sharp, cold focus that burned away the gray fog of despair like the morning sun. From the confines of Meadowlark Gardens, a place designed to extinguish spirits and manage decline, I began to orchestrate my counteroffensive. My supposed helplessness, the very diagnosis he had so cruelly branded me with, became my greatest weapon, my most impenetrable camouflage. To Adrian, to the condescending staff, to the entire world, I was a fading mind, a problem neatly tucked away and managed. I played the part with the skill of a seasoned actress who has found her life's final, greatest role. I would seem confused. I would forget the names of the nurses who brought my pills. I would stare blankly at the blaring, mind-numbing television in the common room. Adrian's visits became shorter, more perfunctory, a box to be checked on his busy schedule. He would come, pat my hand with a dismissive air, ask the nurse if I was stable, and leave, his guilt assuaged by my apparent, predictable decline. He never once suspected that behind the vacant stare, my mind was a whirlwind of activity, a command center for a war he didn't even know was being waged. My unique gift wasn't just my memory, it was my deep, intrinsic, cellular understanding of my son. I knew his every weakness, every insecurity he hid beneath his polished veneer of success. I knew his staggering arrogance, his bottomless greed, and his desperate, pathological need for public approval and admiration. and I would use them all against him, like a master chess player turning her opponent's most powerful pieces to her own advantage. My team, my small band of insurgents, was formidable. Rowena on the outside, my fierce, loyal warrior, my agent in the field. Caspian on the inside, my quiet, methodical spy, my eyes and ears. Rowena was my fury, my connection to the world I had lost. "Just tell me what you need, Margot," she'd say during our carefully timed, whispered phone calls, using a prepaid burner phone she'd bought with cash from a seedy convenience store. A lawyer? A private investigator? A goddamn wrecking ball? You name it, and I will make it happen. We started with a lawyer. Rowena, through a friend of a friend, found a woman named Ms. Albright, a shark in a silk blouse whose specialty was elder abuse and high-stakes financial fraud. We had a three-way conference call, with me hidden in a quiet, dusty corner of the drab Meadowlark library, pretending to read a large print book. I told her everything, my voice low and steady. She listened without interruption, her occasional I see cutting through the static with grim, determined precision. "He's arrogant, and he was sloppy," Ms. Albright concluded after I finished my story. "That's how we'll get him. The arrogant ones always leave a trail." My role was to gather the evidence from within. Caspian, my quiet, unassuming nurse, became my covert operative. His initial sympathy had blossomed into a fierce, protective loyalty. "What he did is a disgrace to his profession," Caspian said during one of our late-night chats in my room, his face illuminated by the cool blue glow of his tablet as he showed me the files he was exfiltrating. I had a grandmother. She was a brilliant woman, a historian. My uncle did this to her. Convinced everyone she was losing her mind. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. She just faded. I was too young to stop it then. I'm not too young now. This emotional, quiet confession, this shared history of injustice, forged a bond between us stronger than steel. He was my lifeline, my partner in this righteous conspiracy. With painstaking care, using the hospital's own security flaws against them, Caspian began to clone my entire medical file from the facility server onto a secured, heavily encrypted flash drive. He documented every fraudulent entry, every note where Adrian had described my symptoms which directly contradicted Caspian's own meticulously detailed nursing logs, which he had been keeping separately, by hand, in a small black notebook. He found something else, too, a digital smoking gun. In his haste to secure my assets, Adrian had moved large sums of money from my main investment trust into a series of newly created, high-risk accounts. It was clumsy, arrogant. He was so sure he was untouchable, so convinced of my incompetence, that he hadn't covered his tracks with the care of a seasoned criminal. He had left a breadcrumb trail of wire transfers and digital receipts, a trail that led directly to him. Meanwhile, I worked on Adrian directly, playing my part with an almost artistic relish. During one of his visits, I clutched his hand, my eyes wide with manufactured fear and confusion. "Adrian, darling," I whispered, my voice intentionally frail and trembling, a quavering echo of my former self. I had a dream. It was so real. I dreamt that Arthur and I had set up a special trust fund. A long time ago. For your sister's children. An educational fund. But I can't remember the details. The bank, the account number, it's all so foggy now. Was it the Bank of America? Or was it Wells Fargo? I knew that his relationship with his sister was strained, poisoned by a lifelong, petty jealousy over what they both perceived as their rightful inheritance. The mere suggestion that she might be entitled to a piece of the pie he didn't know about would ignite his greed like a match to a puddle of gasoline. I watched him, my heart a cold, steady drum against my ribs. I saw him try to hide the flicker of avarice in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He patted my hand condescendingly, his voice dripping with the false reassurance one uses on a confused child. "Don't you worry about that, Mom. It was probably just a dream. But I'll look into it. Just to be sure." And just like that, the trap was set. My predator of a son, blinded by his own insatiable greed, would now start frantically digging through the financial labyrinth he had created, trying to find a non-existent account. His frantic, clumsy search would create a flurry of digital activity, a storm of incriminating evidence that Ms. Albright's forensic accountant, a quiet genius named Mr. Chin, was standing by, waiting to catch in his digital net. Then came the second phase of the plan, a direct and devastating strike at the very heart of his professional pride. It was time to give him a taste of his own bitter, paralytic medicine. The final act was not a single event, but a masterpiece of coordinated, cascading strikes, a symphony of destruction I had composed from my beige room, the notes delivered by my loyal conspirators. It began with a quiet, unassuming manila envelope. Ms. Albright had packaged Caspian's evidence into an undeniable, indefensible dossier and sent it via a bonded courier to the chairman of the State Medical Board. It contained everything, the printout of the original diagnosis sitting starkly next to Adrian's fraudulent override, a side-by-side comparison that screamed malice. It contained 20 pages of Caspian's meticulous nursing notes, which painted a picture of a lucid, intelligent, engaged woman, a picture that flatly contradicted Adrian's self-serving claims of my rapid decline. And it contained a sworn, notarized affidavit from my original physician, Dr. Stevens, stating unequivocally that he had never consulted with Dr. Adrian Vance about a dementia diagnosis and, in fact, had been so alarmed when he could no longer reach his patient that he had filed a report of concern himself, a report that had been conveniently lost by the very facility Adrian had chosen for me. It was a perfect, hermetically sealed case of medical fraud, patient endangerment, and gross professional misconduct. While the board began its confidential, internal investigation, the financial trap I had set snapped shut with the resounding clang of a bank vault door. Mr. Chin, the forensic accountant, had tracked Adrian's frantic, greedy search for the non-existent inheritance. We had a detailed report showing how he had made a series of panicked, illegal transfers from my main trust into his personal accounts, trying to consolidate the funds before his sister could lay claim to her fictional share. It was a clear, unambiguous, and laughably clumsy case of embezzlement, an act born of pure, unadulterated greed, documented with timestamps and IP addresses. The confrontation, when it came, was nothing like he could have ever imagined. There was no tearful bedside confession, no dramatic family showdown in a lawyer's office. Instead, he was served. He was standing in the gleaming, marble-floored lobby of his prestigious clinic, laughing with one of his partners, a picture of success and affluence. A stoic, unimpressed process server walked up to him and handed him the papers. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit for fraud and embezzlement, and a temporary restraining order, forcing him to stay 500 feet away from me and my assets. Rowena watched the entire scene from the driver's seat of her sensible Subaru across the street, a grimly satisfied smile on her face. She called me the second it was over, her voice electric with victory. "You should have seen his face, Margot," she crowed. It was like watching a beautiful, expensive vase get hit with a hammer. It just shattered. The news of the medical board investigation and the lawsuit broke simultaneously, a 1-2 punch from which he could never recover. Ms. Albright had strategically leaked the story to a well-known investigative reporter. The media, smelling the blood of a prominent, wealthy figure in the water, descended. The story was irresistible, a perfect modern tragedy that played on everyone's deepest fears. Respected cardiologist accused of falsifying mother's dementia diagnosis to steal millions. Then, and only then, did I deliver the final, personal blow. I agreed to one and only one television interview. I did not do it from my room in the nursing home. Ms. Albright had me formally released the day the story broke, citing the ongoing investigation and the clear, irrefutable evidence of wrongful confinement. I sat in my lawyer's elegant, wood-paneled office, a wall of law books behind me, dressed not as a frail, confused victim, but as the woman I had always been, composed, intelligent, and unyielding. I didn't rage or cry or ask for pity. I simply, calmly, told the truth, my voice clear and steady, a stark contrast to the shaky, frail woman I had pretended to be for months. I explained the digital evidence, the financial trail, the systematic, cruel gaslighting. I laid out his crime with the cool precision of a surgeon dissecting a tumor. I ended by looking directly into the camera, into the eyes of millions, and, I hoped, into the black, ruined abyss of my son's soul. My son is a brilliant doctor, I said, my voice unwavering, each word a carefully chosen stone dropped into a silent pool. He knows everything there is to know about the human heart. He can map its rhythms, diagnose its failures, and even mend its broken valves. But he knows nothing, absolutely nothing, of its truth. The public fallout was catastrophic and immediate for him. His partners bought him out of the clinic at a fraction of its worth to save their own reputations. His patients, the ones who had revered him as a god of healing, left in droves. His name, once a symbol of success and prestige, became synonymous with the vilest form of familial betrayal. The court proceedings were a formality. He settled out of court, stripped of his medical license, his reputation, and every cent of the fortune he had stolen from me. The family bonds were not restored, they were cauterized, severed completely and irrevocably. There was no reconciliation, no tearful embrace, no path to forgiveness. He had made his choice, and I had simply held up a mirror to show him, and the world, the monster he had become. I bought a small, modern house on the Oregon coast, all glass and cedar, with large windows that overlook the raw, churning power of the Pacific Ocean. The air is clean here, salty and sharp. Rowena visits often, and we drink expensive wine and watch the storms roll in, two old warriors enjoying our hard-won peace. Caspian is in his second year of medical school at Johns Hopkins, his tuition fully funded by the Dr. Arthur Vance Memorial Scholarship, a fund I established for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds who possess not only a brilliant mind, but a compassionate heart. Sometimes I watch the waves crash against the shore, an endless, powerful cycle of retreat and return, and I think about the storm I weathered. I did not seek revenge out of hatred, though there was hatred, a cold and righteous anger. I did it because he had tried to erase my story, to silence my voice, to steal my very identity. And I, Margot Vance, was not going to let him write the final chapter. I wrote it myself.